So Charlie Munger.
All right, I scratched out a few notes, and I'm going to try and just give an account of some ideas and attitudes that have worked well for me. I don't claim that they're perfect for everybody, although I think many of them are pretty close to universal values, and many of them are can't-fail ideas. What are the core ideas that have helped me? Well, luckily, I got at a very early age the idea that the safest way to try and get what you want is to try and deserve what you want. It's such a simple idea. It's the golden rule, so to speak. You want to deliver to the world what you would buy if you were on the other end. There is no ethos, in my opinion, that is better for any lawyer or any other person to have. By and large, the people who've had this ethos win in life, and they don't win just money, just honors and emoluments. They win the respect, the deserved trust of the people they deal with. And there is huge pleasure in life to be obtained from getting deserved trust. And the way to get it is to deliver what you'd want to buy if the circumstances were reversed. Now, occasionally you find a perfect rogue of a person who dies rich and widely known. But mostly these people are fully understood by the surrounding civilization. And when the cathedral is full of people at the funeral ceremony, most of them are there to celebrate the fact that the person is dead. And that reminds me of the story of a time when one of these people died and the minister said, "It's now time for someone to say something nice about the deceased." And nobody came forward. And nobody came forward. And nobody came forward. And finally one man came up and he said, "Well, his brother was worse." That is not where you want to go. That's not the kind of funeral you want to have. You'll leave entirely the wrong example. A second idea that I got very early was that there's no love that's so right as admiration-based love, and that love should include the instructive dead. Somehow I got that idea, and I've lived with it all my life, and it's been very, very useful to me. A love like that celebrated by Somerset Maugham in his book of Human Bondage, that's a sick kind of love. It's a disease. And if you find yourself in a disease like that, my advice to you is turn around and fix it, eliminate it. Another idea that was hugely useful to me was that I listened in law school when some wag said, "A legal mind is a mind that when two things are all twisted up together and interacting, it's feasible to think responsibly about one thing and not the other." Well, I could see from that one sentence that that was perfectly ridiculous, and it pushed me further into my natural drift, which was into learning all the big ideas and all the big disciplines, so I wouldn't be a perfect damn fool who was trying to think about one aspect of something that couldn't be removed from the totality of the situation in a constructive fashion. And what I noted, since the really big ideas carry 95% of the freight, that it wasn't at all hard for me to pick up all the big ideas in all the disciplines and make them a standard part of my mental routines. Once you have the ideas, of course, they're no good if you don't practice. If you don't practice, you lose it. Another idea, and by the way, when I talk about this multidisciplinary attitude, I'm really following a very key idea of the greatest lawyer of antiquity, Marcus Tullus Cicero. And Cicero is famous for saying, a man who doesn't know what happened before he's born goes through life like a child. Now, that is a very correct idea of Cicero's, and he's right to ridicule somebody so foolish as not to know what happened before he was born. But if you generalize Cicero, as I think one should, there are all these other things that you should know in addition to history. And those other things are the big ideas in all the other disciplines. And it doesn't help you just to know them enough so you could prattle them back on an exam and get an A. You have to learn these things in such a way that they're in a mental lattice work in your head and you automatically use them for the rest of your life. If you do that, I solemnly promise you that one day you'll be walking down the street and you'll look to your right and left and you'll think, my heavenly days, I'm now one of the few most competent people of my whole age cohort. If you don't do it, many of the brightest of you will live in the middle ranks or in the shallows. Another idea that I got, and it was encapsulated by that story the dean recounted about the man who wanted to know where he was going to die and he wouldn't go there. That rustic who had that idea had a profound truth in his hand. The way complex adaptive systems work and the way mental constructs work, problems frequently get easy. I'd even say usually are easier to solve if you turn them around in reverse. In other words, if you want to help India, the question you should ask is now, how can I help India? You think, what's doing the worst damage in India? What will automatically do the worst damage, and how do I avoid it? You'd think they're logically the same thing. They're not. Those of you who have mastered algebra know that inversion frequently will solve problems which nothing else will solve. And in life, unless you're more gifted than Einstein, inversion will help you solve problems that you can't solve another way. Let me use a little inversion now. What will really fail in life? What do we want to avoid? Such an easy answer. Sloth and unreliability. If you're unreliable, it doesn't matter what your virtues are. You're going to crater immediately. So doing what you have faithfully engaged to do should be an automatic part of your conduct. You want to avoid sloth and unreliability. Another thing, of course, that does one in is the self-serving bias to which we're all subject. You think the true little me is entitled to do what it wants to do. And, for instance, why shouldn't the true little me overspend my income? Well, there once was a man who became the most famous composer in the world, but he was utterly miserable most of the time. And one of the reasons was he always overspent his income. That was Mozart. If Mozart can't get by with this kind of asinine conduct, I don't think you should try it. And of course, the self-serving bias, you want to get out of yourself. Thinking that what's good for you is good for the wider civilization and rationalizing all these ridiculous conclusions based on this subconscious tendency to serve oneself is it's a terribly inaccurate way to think. And of course you want to drive that out of yourself because you want to be wise, not foolish. You also have to allow for the self-serving bias of everybody else, because most people are not going to remove it all that successfully, the human condition being what it is. If you don't allow for self-serving bias in your conduct, again, you're a fool. You just aren't competent. I watched the brilliant Harvard Law Review trained general counsel of Solomon lose his career. And what he did was, when the CEO was aware that some underling had done something wrong, the general counsel said, gee, we don't have any legal duty to report this, but I think it's what we should do. It's our moral duty. And the general counsel was totally correct. But of course it didn't work. It was a very unpleasant thing for the CEO to do, and he put it off and put it off and put it off. And in due course, why the thing eroded into a major scandal, and down went the CEO and the general counsel with him. The correct answer in situations like that was given by Ben Franklin. He says, if you would persuade, appeal to interest, not to reason. The self-serving bias is so extreme. If the general counsel had said, look, this can erupt in something that will destroy you, take away your money, take away your status, it's a perfect disaster, it would have worked. You want to appeal to interest. You want to do it with lofty motives, but you should not avoid appealing to interest. Another thing, perverse incentives. You don't want to be in a perverse incentive system that's causing you to behave more and more foolishly or worse and worse. Incentives are too powerful a controller of human cognition and human behavior. And one of the things you're going to find in some modern law firms is billable hour quotas. And I could not have lived under a billable hour quota of 2,400 hours a year. That would have caused huge problems for me. I wouldn't have done it. And I don't have a solution for that for you. You'll have to figure it out for yourself. But it's a significant problem. Perverse associations, also to be avoided. And you particularly want to avoid working directly under somebody you really don't admire and don't want to be like. It's very dangerous. We're all subject to control to some extent by authority figures, particularly authority figures that are rewarding us. And that requires some talent. The way I solved that is I figured out the people I did admire, and I maneuvered cleverly without criticizing anybody. So I was working entirely under people I admired. And a lot of law firms will permit that if you're shrewd enough to work it out. And your outcome in life will be way more satisfactory and way better if you work under people you really admire. The alternative is not a good idea. Objectivity maintenance. Well, we all remember that Darwin paid special attention to disconfirming evidence, particularly when it disconfirmed something he believed and loved. Well, objectivity maintenance routines are totally required in life if you're going to be a correct thinker. And there we're talking about Darwin's attitude, special attention to the disconfirming evidence, and also to checklist routines. Checklist routines avoid a lot of errors. You should have all this elementary wisdom, and then you should go through a mental checklist in order to use it. There is no other procedure that will work as well. A last idea that I found very important is I realized very early that non-egality would work better in the parts of the world I wanted to inhabit. What do I mean by non-egality? I mean John Wooden, when he was the #1 basketball coach in the world, he just said to the bottom 5 players, you don't get to play your sparring partners. The top 7 did all the playing. Well, the top 7 learned more, remember the learning machine, because they were doing all the playing. And when he got to that system, why, Wooden won more than he'd ever won before. I think the game of life, in many respects, is getting a lot of practice into the hands of the people that have the most aptitude to learn and the most tendency to be learning machines. And if you want the very highest reaches of human civilization, that's where you have to go. You do not want to choose a brain surgeon from your child among 50 applicants, all of whom just take turns doing the procedure. You know, that's not the way to get the really important. You know, your airplane's designed that way. You don't want your Berkshire Hathaways run that way. You want to get the power into the right people. Another thing that I found is that an intense interest in the subject is indispensable if you're really going to excel in it. I could force myself to be fairly good in a lot of things, but I couldn't be really good in anything where I didn't have an intense interest. So to some extent, you're going to have to follow me in if at all feasible, you want to drift into doing something in which you have a natural interest. Another thing you have to do, of course, is have a lot of assiduity. I like that word because it means sit down on your ass until you do it. And I've had marvelous partners all my life. I think I got them partly because I tried to deserve them, and partly because I was wise enough to select them, and partly maybe there was some luck. But two partners that I chose for one little phase of my life had the following rule when they created a little design, build, construction team. They sat down and said, two-man partnership, divide everything equally. Here's the rule. Whenever we're behind in our commitments to other people, we will both work 14 hours a day until we're caught up. Well, needless to say, that firm didn't fail. The people died honored and rich. It's such a simple idea. It's such a simple idea. Another thing, of course, is life will have terrible blows in it. Horrible blows. Unfair blows. Doesn't matter. And some people recover and others don't. And there I think the attitude of Epictetus is the best. He thought that every mischance in life was an opportunity to behave well. Every mischance in life was an opportunity to learn something. And that your duty was not to be submerged in self-pity, but to utilize the terrible blow in a constructive fashion. That is a very good idea. And you may remember the epitaph which Epictetus left for himself. It said, "Here lies Epictetus, a slave, maimed in body, and the ultimate in poverty and favored of the gods." Well, that's the way Epictetus is now remembered. He's had big consequences. And he was favored of the gods. He was favored because he became wise, and he became manly. Very good idea. The last idea that I want to give to you as you go out into a profession that is frequently puts a lot of procedure and a lot of precautions and a lot of mumbo-jumbo into what it does. This is not the highest form which civilization can reach. The highest form that civilization can reach is a seamless web of deserved trust. Not much procedure, just totally reliable people correctly trusting one another. That's the way an operating room works at the Mayo Clinic. If a bunch of lawyers were to introduce a lot of process, the patients would all die. So never forget, when you're a lawyer, that you may be sold for selling this stuff, but you don't have to buy it. You may be rewarded for selling it, but you don't have to buy it. In your own life, what you want is a seamless web of deserved trust. And if your proposed marriage contract has 47 pages, my suggestion is you not enter. Well, that's enough for one graduation. I hope these ruminations of an old man are useful to you. In the end, I'm like Old Valiant for Truth in Pilgrim's Progress. My sword I leave to him who can wear it.
You get sick for a minute.